Hello friends, welcome back once again to my video tutorial. This is Lipsa again with you. So today I am going to describe how you can invoke AWS Lambda function by using API Gateway. So I have already described how you can add S3 bucket as a trigger to invoke a Lambda function. So in this video we will learn how we can add API Gateway as a trigger to invoke a Lambda function. Okay, so I hope you all are aware of what is API Gateway. So AWS API Gateway is a fully managed service that makes it easy for developers to create, publish, maintain, monitor and secure APIs at any scale. It allows you to build RESTful APIs that can be called from any platform, that might be HTTP or HTTPS request. You can use API Gateway to create API that access AWS or other AWS services as well as data stored in the AWS cloud. So API Gateway you can integrate in Lambda, DynamoDB to build and deploy serverless applications. Okay, so that is your use of API Gateway. So today we will learn how we can invoke a AWS Lambda function when we call a HTTP method from our API Gateway. Okay, so let's get started guys. So first of all we need to have a Lambda function, then we'll add a trigger as API Gateway to that Lambda. Then we'll write some piece of code in our Java and deploy that code to our AWS Lambda function. So whenever we trigger the API Gateway, then that Lambda will be invoked and that piece of code will be executed. So we'll see that in this video. So let me go to my AWS management console. As you can see, I have already logged into my AWS management console. So let me search here for the Lambda services. So here is the Lambda. Let me go inside to the Lambda management console. So this is the Lambda. You can see Lambda with API Gateway. I have already created this Lambda function. If you don't know how to create a Lambda function, please check my previous video in AWS Lambda playlist. So this is the Lambda function. Now you can see here, I have not uploaded any code here to this Lambda. First I will show you the details about this Lambda. Okay. So let me add a trigger to this Lambda function. Okay. So select a source, which kind of trigger you want to add. So for this video tutorial, we are going to add API Gateway as a trigger to this Lambda function. So we have already seen how we can add S3 as a trigger. Now we'll see how we can add API Gateway as a trigger to this Lambda function. So here you can see API Gateway. Just choose this one. Create a new API or use your existing API. So we'll go from the create a new API option. So choose this option. Then HTTP API we are going to create. Okay. Then security, I don't want to add any authorizer concept to this API Gateway. So I'll go with the open security policy. Now in the additional settings, so I'll go with all the default combination in the additional settings. So just click here add to add the trigger. So now you can see this API Gateway trigger is added to this Lambda with API Gateway. So if I expand these details, then you can see this endpoint is nothing but your HTTP endpoint. This one. Okay, this is your API Gateway endpoint. So in the details you can see API type is HTTP. We have not added any authorization concept here. So that's why authorization is none. Also there is no cost. So this is also no. Detail matrix enabled, that is also no. Then method, any type of method we have chosen. So in my next video when I go for the REST API implementation by using API Gateway, there I can show you various HTTP method. Okay, like post, get, delete and all. So for this example the method is any. You can take any type of method. Okay. So resource path is Lambda with API Gateway. So this is nothing but your endpoint. Clear? And this is your ID. Is this default. Okay, so that is all about the details of API Gateway. So our Lambda function is ready and that trigger to this Lambda function, which is nothing but API Gateway, that is also ready. So now we'll write a piece of Java code and deploy this code to our Lambda. So whenever we hit this endpoint from our Postman or from our browser, that piece of code will be executed and you'll get the response from API Gateway. Clear so far? Okay, so now I'll go to my I'll go to my ID. So this is my IntelliJ ID. So we'll write a piece of code. So whenever we call this endpoint, call this API gateway endpoint, the Lambda function will be executed, and whatever piece of code written inside that Lambda function, that will get in the response. Okay. So this is the project I have already created to save some time. So AWS Lambda with API gateway. Clear? So this is the project name. So let me expand this project and go to pom.xml. So see, so this is the pom.xml. You can see I have chosen the Java version 1.8. Then I have added some dependency which is required for AWS Lambda, like AWS Lambda Java core, AWS Lambda Java events. So don't worry about this project and this dependency. I'll share the GitHub link of this entire project so that you can download and check it by yourself. Okay. So then I have added the project Lambda here. Okay. Then I have added the FastAxle Jackson core dependency. Okay. So that is all about the pom.xml, and also in the plugin section I have added the Maven set plugin. Clear? So that is nothing but my pom.xml. So let me close this one and let me go to the src folder. So in the src I have the main, then Java. Then inside this package I have created two bin. One is employee, other is API response. So let me open this employee first. Okay. So in the employee I have three parameters like ID, name and email. Here I have used the Lambda properties like @data to generate the getter and setter, and @allax constructor to create the constructor with all the arguments, that is ID, name and email. Okay. So that is the employee object. Clear? And why I am created this employee object, I'll tell you later. Then I have a API response. So this API response I am going to return whenever this endpoint will be called. Okay. So I am going to return this response from my Lambda function. Clear? So this API response contains body, then status code, then some headers, which is a map key value pair. Clear? So in the body of this API response, I am going to throw the list of employee object. Okay. In the body, the list of employee object I am going to throw. And in the status code, I'll throw some like 200 something. And in the headers, I'll put some dummy header value. You can add any custom header inside this header field. Okay. In the response of this endpoint. So now what is? Now we'll create a Lambda handler. As you know, so for every Lambda function, we need to create a Lambda handler. So here we are going to create a Lambda handler now. Okay. So let me create a Lambda handler first. So new Java class. So I'll create a Lambda handler here. Okay. So now this Lambda handler will implements what? Request handler. So request handler will take two parameters. One is input and other is output to this Lambda function. So what is the input here? So input is nothing but API gateway proxy request event. So this is the input to this Lambda function. Okay. As whenever we are going to call this endpoint, this API endpoint, our Lambda is going to invoke. Okay. So the input to this Lambda handler is nothing but API gateway proxy request event. And what is the output? So output I am going to give here what? This API response object. This API response object. This is our custom response which we have created. This one, which contains body, status code and headers. Okay. So this is the input to my Lambda handler and this is the output to my Lambda handler. So now we'll override the method of this request handler, handle request method. So this is the handle request method. Okay. So return type of this method is what? API response. Okay. This is the API response and the input is this one. API gateway proxy request event and the context. Okay. So you know the context, right? So now we'll build this API response object and return this one. Okay. So now let me create one private method here. Private API response. Okay. Build API response. Let me create like this. Build API response. Okay. So API response contains what? API response contains body, status code and headers. So let me provide here the body first. So body as I mentioned, body is nothing but list of employee object. So now I'll create a list of employee object first. Okay. So let me create another method here which will return me the list of what? Employee object. So let's say employee list. Okay. Employee list. So I'll provide some dummy employee object here. Okay. So let me import all those things. Clear? So here I'll provide like API response is equal to new API response. So here we'll call this method first employee list, then we have the status code. So status code, let's say 200, then we have headers. So headers, then we will provide some dummy headers here. Let me create a key value pair map for these headers. Okay. Like I'll add the author, let's say I'll add the author and the API version. So now headers is ready. So we have provided the status code as 200 and the body. So body is we have provided this list of employee list. But this is a return type is list of employee. So we need to convert it to what? String. So I'll use string body is equal to I'll use the object mapper class to convert it to object mapper dot write value as string. Then I'll pass this employee list. Okay, so I'll pass this body here now. Now it is a string type. Understood? But here, okay, so that will throw error write value as string. Let me surround this with try catch block. Okay, so I have surrounded this with try catch block. So let me do one thing. Let me print here the error message as well as our response. Okay. So to put the error message, let me use this context here. I'll pass this context. You can add the logger. I'll use this context to print the error message context.get logger dot log. Okay. And here you can put any error occurs. Clear? And here you can also put your response as well. Okay, here we can put the response to print it in flux and of course return this response. Clear so far? So we have created a list of employee object, then we have created this build API response which contains header, body and what? Status code. Okay, so body is nothing but our this list of employee list, and the header we put some dummy header, and here we have put the status code as 200. So now we'll call this method inside this handle request. Okay, so this is just one example I am showing you how we can invoke a lambda function by using API gateway endpoint. Okay, you can use your own logic here. Correct. So I just write this piece of code. So simply I just want to return this API response type response from this Lambda handler. Okay. So now my code is almost ready. Clear, my Lambda handler is ready. So now I'll do one thing. I will build this application that will create a jar file. I'll deploy that jar file and we'll check the response. Okay. So let me do one thing. So we'll build this application and then clean install. Okay. So now build is successful. Also jar file is created. So let me go to my Lambda function and here let me click here in the code and I'll upload the jar file from here. Upload from G for jar. Let me upload. So this is my jar file AWS Lambda with API gateway. So select this one, then save. Okay. So my source code is updated successfully. Okay. Now what else? Okay. Now here in the handler section, I need to update my package name and my class name. So I need to edit this section. Else it won't work. Okay. So here my package name is what? com.app. This is my package name. Then you have the class name. So my class name is Lambda handler. Okay, I hope you all are aware of these things. So in my first video of Lambda, I have already shown how you can create a Lambda function and run it. Okay, Lambda handler, then this is the method name. So I guess method name is same here. Handle request, yeah, this is the same, no need to change it. So now we can save it. Yeah, successfully updated our Lambda. Then let me go to this API gateway. And this is our endpoint. So you can hit this endpoint from your Postman. Also you can hit it from your browser. So if I'll hit this endpoint, so we are getting internal server error here. So let me check what is the issue. So this is our Lambda with API gateway. So the trigger, let me check once again this Lambda settings. Runtime Java 11 com.app. Let me cross check. Okay, so our package name is com.app.easy to excel. Okay, so this is the miss from our side. So here we have added com.app. So we need to provide the package name correctly. com.app easy to excel. Okay, then this is the Lambda handler. This is the class name. Then we have the method name like handle request. So this is the miss from our side. Okay, package name is wrong. So that's why we are getting internal server error. So if you see the, let me save this one. Okay, so this is successfully updated. So if you see the CloudWatch logs for this one also, you can see class not found exception we are getting because our package name is wrong. Okay, so now if I'll hit this endpoint, then we'll get the actual response. Let's see. Okay, see, we are getting the response. So this is nothing but our body, isn't it? In the body we have returned the list of employee object. So this is our body. So if I inspect this one, then you can see the header and let me refresh this one. So see, so in the response we are getting, this is the endpoint Lambda with API gateway. Okay, so in the response we are getting the body. So in the header section if I click, you can see this is the status code which we have provided 200, and in the response header we are getting X Amazon API version v1 X Amazon author Lipsa. Okay, along with this API gateway request ID, then date, content type and length. Okay, so this is nothing but how we can add API gateway as a trigger to this Lambda function, and whenever we hit this endpoint, this Lambda will be invoked. So we saw how we can add API gateway as a trigger to this Lambda function. Okay, so let me do one thing. Let me search API gateway here. let me go to this API Gateway Service as well. So here also you can see Lambda with API Gateway API is created here also. So this is your ID. This ID and this ID, if you mark, this is same. Okay. So let me go to this API Gateway. Yeah, Lambda with API Gateway API. Okay. This is your API Gateway. This is your ID and this is the endpoint, isn't it? This is the endpoint. You can see these things in the API Gateway section as well. Clear? So that's how your API Gateway works to invoke a Lambda function. So I hope you understand how we can create a Lambda function and how we can add a trigger to this API Gateway. So let me do one thing. Let me go to the Lambda again. This is the Lambda, right? So if I click on the monitor section also, you can see the logs as well. Let me see any logs is there in the CloudWatch or not. Yeah, so we have two logs. Let me open the first one. This is the latest one. See, so we can see the API response. This is the request ID and this is the end request ID. First one, this is the second one. Okay, so we are getting the response body here and the status code and the header. Okay, in the logs also we can see all those things. API response. Clear? So I hope you understood how we can add API Gateway as trigger to a Lambda function. Okay, so in my next video I'll share how we can create the REST endpoints by using API Gateway and call all those endpoints like HTTP GET method, POST method, PUT method and delete method. Okay, so I'll create an entire video on the API Gateway, Lambda and DynamoDB. So till then, thanks for watching. Thank you.